Most people do not truly have a bad life. What they have is a weak philosophy, and that is the uncomfortable truth. You can be hardworking, you can be kind, you can carry a great deal of potential within you, but if the way you think about life is flawed, then sooner or later your effort will bring you back to the same place you started. Many people believe their future will change when their circumstances change. But Jim Rohn saw the situation in a much colder and far more accurate way. Your life does not change when the weather changes. Your life changes when your philosophy changes. If you continue to see the past as a burden, you will walk forward with your feet tied. If you look at the future with anxiety, you will live in a defensive posture. And if you never sit down and deliberately design your life, then eventually your life will be designed for you by habits, by pressure, by bills, by procrastination, and by the small decisions you once believed did not matter. That is why most people do not fail in a single dramatic moment. They fail slowly, quietly, and logically. They do not collapse because of one catastrophic mistake. They erode because of a directionless way of living. They wake up each morning, do what is familiar, react to whatever stands in front of them, and call that life. But Jim Rohn made something very clear. The future is not something you enter. The future is something you create. And right here, another truth must be faced. You cannot build a powerful future with a weak mind. You cannot demand clarity in your life if your thinking is still vague. You cannot expect discipline to appear if your philosophy continues to negotiate with comfort and convenience. That is why this conversation does not begin with money. It does not begin with goals, and it does not begin with motivation. It begins at a much deeper place. The way you see yourself, the way you interpret your past, and the way you think about the years ahead. Because the moment you correct your philosophy, you do not just change one decision, you begin to redirect the entire course of your life. Now the real problem begins to reveal itself. And it is not a problem of intelligence, opportunity, or even effort. The real problem is that most people never stop long enough to examine the direction of their life. They are busy, constantly moving, constantly reacting, constantly solving the next immediate issue, yet very rarely asking a far more important question: where exactly is all of this going? Jim Rohn often explained that life has a strange way of rewarding motion, even when the motion is in the wrong direction. You can work very hard, stay extremely busy, and still arrive somewhere you never intended to go. That is why effort alone is never the real answer. Activity alone is never the real solution. Direction is what determines the destination. And for many people, direction is exactly what is missing. They wake up in the morning and step into a schedule that was never designed with intention. They go to work, they pay their bills, they respond to the pressures around them, and over time, they begin to believe that this constant reaction is simply what life is supposed to be. But if you look closely, something subtle begins to happen. When a person stops designing their future, they slowly begin to inherit the future designed by circumstances. Instead of choosing a path, they start drifting along the path that is easiest to walk. Instead of asking what they truly want their life to become, they begin adjusting themselves to whatever situation appears next. And drifting has a dangerous quality that most people never notice until it is too late. Drifting feels comfortable in the beginning. There is no immediate pain, no sudden collapse, no dramatic moment of failure. In fact, drifting can look very normal from the outside. A steady job, familiar routines, predictable days. But over time, drifting slowly replaces intention. And when intention disappears, growth quietly disappears with it. Jim Rohn used to say that the greatest tragedy is not that people aim too high and miss. The real tragedy is that they aim too low and hit. Because when your vision is small, life becomes small with it. The goals you choose determine the size of the person you must become. If your goals demand very little growth, then very little growth will ever occur. That is why the first real problem is not money, and it is not opportunity. The first real problem is clarity. Most people have never taken the time to clearly define what they want their future to look like. They hope things will improve. They assume things will eventually work out. But hope without design is only wishful thinking. And wishful thinking has never built a meaningful life. This is why Jim Rohn constantly emphasized one simple discipline that almost everyone ignores. Sit down and decide what you want. Not what other people expect, not what circumstances seem to allow, but what you truly want your life to become. Because the moment the future becomes clear, something powerful begins to happen inside the human mind. Energy increases. Discipline becomes easier. Sacrifice begins to make sense. When the promise of the future becomes vivid enough, the price that must be paid suddenly becomes far less painful. And without that clarity, people drift. With that clarity, people begin to move with purpose. At this point, we arrive at one of the most powerful ideas ever taught by Jim Rohn, and it is an idea that completely changes how you look at success, goals, and even money itself. Most people believe that goals exist for one reason: to get something, to earn more money, to buy a better house, to travel more, to reach a higher level of comfort or status. But Jim Rohn challenged that assumption in a way that stops people in their tracks. He said the real value of setting goals is not what you get. The real value is what you become. That single principle completely reframes the purpose of ambition. Because if goals are only about getting things, then the moment you lose those things, you lose everything. But if goals are about becoming a stronger, wiser, more capable human being, then nothing you experience is ever truly lost. Jim Rohn shared a personal story that illustrates this principle perfectly. In his early 30s, he had achieved something many people spend their entire lives chasing. By the age of 31, he had become a millionaire. For most people, that would be the ultimate validation that their strategy worked. But only 2 years later, by the age of 33, he lost it all and found himself broke again. Now, most people would see that story as a disaster, proof that something went terribly wrong. But Jim Rohn saw it very differently. When the money disappeared, something else remained. The skills he had developed, the discipline he had learned, the understanding he had gained about the marketplace, about people, about opportunity, about value, those things were still there. And those things were actually far more valuable than the money itself. Because money can be lost, but the person you become in the process of earning it cannot be taken away. That is why Jim Rohn encouraged people to set goals that are large enough to force growth. Goals that require you to read more, to learn more, to stretch beyond the limits of your current thinking. If your goals are too small, they will not demand enough from you to create real transformation. But if your goals challenge you, they will slowly reshape your character. You will develop patience, discipline, resilience, and a deeper understanding of how the world actually works. In that sense, the goal is never just the destination. The goal is the process that builds a stronger version of yourself. And that leads to another important warning that Jim Rohn often emphasized. Do not pursue goals that require you to sacrifice your principles. There is always a middle road between ambition and integrity. Success that costs your character is not success at all. The purpose of ambition is not to corrupt your values, but to refine them. True achievement makes you wiser, not emptier. It expands your capacity, not your ego. And when you understand this principle clearly, something interesting begins to happen. Your relationship with effort changes. Hard work no longer feels like punishment. Discipline no longer feels like restriction. They begin to feel like investments in the person you are becoming, because every book you read, every skill you develop, every discipline you practice is quietly shaping your future identity. In the end, the marketplace does not reward you for what you want. It rewards you for what you have become capable of delivering. Your income rarely exceeds your personal development for long. And that is why the most powerful investment you will ever make is not in the stock market, not in real estate, and not even in business. The most powerful investment you can ever make is in your own growth. Now, this leads us to a question that is both uncomfortable and necessary. If these ideas are so simple, why do so many people fail to apply them? Why do so many people remain stuck for years, sometimes decades, without building the life they once imagined? According to Jim Rohn, the answer is rarely a lack of opportunity. The real reason is much deeper and far more structural. Most people fail not because they are incapable, but because they are operating with the wrong system of thinking. And when the philosophy underneath your life is flawed, every action built on top of it eventually produces the wrong results. The first mistake is that most people never design their future. They assume that time alone will somehow improve their situation. They believe that if they simply work long enough or stay busy enough, life will gradually become better. But time by itself does not solve problems. Time simply reveals the consequences of the direction you are already moving in. If someone spends 10 years drifting without a clear plan, the result will not be 10 years of progress. It will simply be 10 years of drift. The second mistake is that people underestimate the power of small daily decisions. Human beings tend to focus on dramatic moments, big opportunities, major turning points. But most lives are shaped by much smaller forces. The extra hour spent scrolling instead of learning. The paycheck spent entirely on consumption instead of saving and investing. The habit of reacting to life instead of intentionally designing it. None of these decisions seem significant in the moment, yet over the span of years, they quietly determine the entire trajectory of a person's future. The third mistake is the philosophy of spending before investing. Jim Rohn explained this difference very clearly when he compared the philosophy of the poor and the philosophy of the rich. Poor people typically spend their money first and invest whatever happens to remain at the end. The problem is that at the end, there is usually nothing left. Wealthy individuals approach money in the opposite order. They invest first and then learn to live on what remains. What matters most here is not the amount of money involved, but the philosophy behind it. A person earning a modest income can build wealth if they consistently apply the right philosophy. And a person earning a high income can remain financially fragile if they never change their thinking about money. The fourth mistake is the absence of a financial system. Many people hope to achieve financial independence someday, but hope is not a strategy. Without a clear structure for how money should be used, income simply flows in and flows out again with very little long-term impact. Money that could have been used to build assets instead disappears into short-term consumption. Over time, this creates a cycle where people must continue working simply to maintain the same level of living, never building the resources that would eventually give them freedom. And finally, there is the mistake of short-term thinking. Many individuals evaluate their progress week by week or month by month, becoming discouraged when results are not immediate. But the kind of transformation Jim Rohn spoke about rarely happens overnight. It unfolds across years of consistent philosophy and disciplined action. The truth is that 20 years is more than enough time to completely change a person's financial future if the right system is applied consistently. Yet most people never allow enough time for their new habits to compound. They start, they stop, they start again, and the cycle repeats. In the end, their problem is not lack of effort, but lack of consistency guided by the right philosophy. And that is why the solution is not simply motivation. The solution is structure. Once the structure is clear, discipline becomes easier to maintain and progress becomes almost inevitable. So once we understand the problem and the philosophy behind it, the next step becomes clear. What people need is not just motivation and not just a list of goals. What people truly need is a structure, a framework that connects philosophy, behavior, and action. Because without a framework, even the best intentions dissolve under the pressure of everyday life. This is why Jim Rohn did not simply talk about dreaming big or thinking positively. He focused on building a system that guides how a person thinks, how a person behaves, and how a person manages their resources. If you look closely, the transformation he describes can be understood through 3 layers that build on top of each other. Each layer strengthens the next. and together they form a complete structure for personal and financial growth. The first layer is personal philosophy. Everything begins here because philosophy determines how you interpret the world. It shapes how you see the past, how you approach the present, and how you imagine the future. If your philosophy tells you that the past is a burden, then every mistake becomes something that weakens your confidence. But if your philosophy treats the past as a school, then every mistake becomes a lesson that strengthens your understanding. The same principle applies to the future. If you see the future as something uncertain and frightening, you will approach life cautiously and defensively. But if you see the future as something that can be designed, then you begin to approach life with anticipation instead of fear. A strong philosophy gives direction to effort. It reminds you that the purpose of ambition is not simply to accumulate things, but to become a stronger and more capable person. When philosophy becomes clear, decisions become easier because they are guided by a consistent set of beliefs. The second layer is standards and habits. Philosophy alone is not enough if it never turns into behavior. A philosophy must eventually express itself through daily actions. Standards determine what you accept and what you refuse to tolerate in your own life. Habits are the small routines that enforce those standards every day. One of the most powerful habits Jim Rohn taught was the discipline of writing down goals. Not just thinking about them, but writing them clearly and reviewing them regularly. The simple act of writing goals forces clarity. It turns vague hopes into defined intentions. Another essential habit is the principle of investing before spending. This habit may sound small, but over time it separates two completely different financial paths. When people spend first and invest what remains, progress becomes nearly impossible. But when they invest first and learn to live on what remains, they begin building resources that grow over time. Alongside this comes the habit of generosity. Setting aside a portion of what you earn to help others may appear unrelated to success, yet it plays a powerful role in shaping character. Generosity teaches responsibility and reminds a person that wealth is not only about accumulation, but also about contribution. The third layer is the action plan and measurement. This is where philosophy and habits turn into a practical system. Jim Rohn often described a simple financial structure that illustrates this idea clearly. Instead of allowing income to disappear without intention, every dollar should have a purpose. A portion is used for living expenses, another portion is given to support others, another portion is used as active capital to pursue opportunities and generate profits, and another portion becomes passive capital invested for long-term growth. This structure may appear simple, but its power lies in consistency. Over time, these small percentages begin to accumulate into meaningful resources. Active capital encourages creativity and entrepreneurship. Passive capital allows the power of compound growth to work quietly in the background, and the discipline of measuring where money goes ensures that financial behavior remains aligned with long-term goals. When these three layers work together, something remarkable begins to happen. Philosophy provides direction, habits create stability, and the action plan produces measurable progress. Instead of drifting through life, reacting to circumstances, a person begins moving forward with intention. Decisions become easier because they are guided by clear principles. Effort becomes more meaningful because it is connected to a larger vision. And over time, the results that once seemed distant begin to appear naturally as the product of consistent thinking and disciplined action. Understanding a framework is important, but a framework only changes your life when it begins to shape your daily decisions. Ideas are powerful, but only when they are translated into action. This is where implementation begins. And this is where most people either move forward or quietly return to the same patterns that have always controlled their lives. According to Jim Rohn, the first step in implementation is surprisingly simple. You must take the time to sit down and decide what you want, not what sounds reasonable, not what other people expect from you, but what you genuinely want your future to look like. Most people never do this with real seriousness. They carry vague hopes and scattered ambitions, but they rarely convert those ideas into something clear enough to guide their actions. Jim Rohn suggested a discipline that may appear small, but is remarkably powerful. Take a piece of paper and begin writing a list. Write down the skills you want to develop, the places you want to visit, the kind of income you would like to earn, the type of relationships you want to build, and the kind of person you want to become. When these ideas exist only in your head, they remain abstract. But when they are written down, they begin to take form. They become visible commitments instead of temporary thoughts. The second step is to preserve these lists over time. One of the fascinating insights Jim Rohn shared was that your goals will evolve as you grow. When you look back at a list you wrote 10 or 20 years earlier, you may smile at some of the things that once felt extremely important. Some of those goals will no longer matter because your perspective will have matured, but keeping those lists allows you to see your own development. They become a record of how your thinking has expanded and how your ambitions have evolved. In that sense, the list is not only a planning tool, but also a mirror that reflects your personal growth. The third step is to measure progress and celebrate completion. When one of the goals on your list finally becomes reality, take a moment to acknowledge it. Jim Rohn often described a simple ritual he once performed when one of his long-desired goals was achieved. Years earlier, he had written down the goal of visiting Spain. When the day finally arrived and his airplane landed in Madrid, he opened the journal that contained his goal list and waited until the wheels of the plane touched the runway. In that exact moment, he checked the goal off the list. It was a small act, almost symbolic, yet it added a sense of drama and satisfaction to the achievement. These moments reinforce motivation because they remind you that the effort invested over time eventually produces real results. The fourth step is aligning your financial behavior with your long-term goals. Without this alignment, even the most inspiring vision can collapse under everyday spending habits. Implementation requires structure. A portion of what you earn must consistently be directed toward building capital. Part of it becomes active capital used to pursue opportunities and create profits. Another part becomes passive capital invested for long-term growth through financial institutions or other vehicles that allow your resources to multiply over time. When this process continues year after year, something extraordinary begins to happen. The resources you have built start producing income of their own. And that moment marks the beginning of true financial independence. The ability to live from the income generated by your resources rather than depending entirely on wages. Finally, there is one more element of implementation that is often overlooked but deeply important: attitude. The way you interpret everyday responsibilities can either strengthen or weaken your discipline. Many people complain about paying bills or taxes, seeing them only as burdens, but Jim Rohn encouraged a different perspective. Paying a bill means you are reducing liabilities and increasing the strength of your financial position. Paying taxes means contributing to the system that allows the broader economy to function. When responsibilities are viewed through this lens, they stop feeling like punishments and start looking like participation in a larger system of value and opportunity. Implementation, therefore, is not only about actions, but also about perspective. It is about learning to see everyday financial behavior as part of a larger strategy for building independence and long-term stability. As we bring this conversation to a close, it is important to pause and reflect on the deeper message behind everything we have discussed. The ideas shared by Jim Rohn are not complicated theories reserved for experts or economists. They are simple principles about how a human life can be directed with intention instead of left to chance. Yet their simplicity is exactly what makes them powerful, because once you understand them, the responsibility shifts quietly back to you. At the center of Jim Rohn's philosophy is a reminder that every person is given the same fundamental opportunity, the opportunity to see what they can make of themselves. Life will always contain uncertainty. Circumstances will always change. Opportunities will appear and disappear. But the one factor that remains under your control is the person you choose to become in response to those conditions. That is why the true purpose of ambition is not to chase possessions, but to develop capability. A stronger philosophy leads to better decisions. Better decisions lead to stronger habits. And stronger habits slowly build a life that reflects discipline rather than drift. Toward the end of many of his talks, Jim Rohn would leave his audience with 4 simple questions. They are not questions meant to be answered quickly. They are questions meant to stay with you long after the conversation ends. The first question is why? Why work harder on yourself? Why read more books? Why develop new skills? Why push beyond the comfort of familiar routines? It is a question every person eventually asks when effort becomes difficult. But the second question changes the direction of the conversation. Why not see how far you can go? Why not discover how valuable you can become to the marketplace and to the people around you? Why not explore the limits of your own potential? Then comes the third question, and this one makes the message personal. Why not you? Why should transformation only belong to someone else? Why should growth be reserved for a different person with different circumstances? The truth is that most of the individuals who eventually build remarkable lives begin from ordinary beginnings. They are not defined by where they started, but by the philosophy they adopted along the way. The same books are available. The same principles are available. The same opportunities to learn, to grow, and to improve are available to anyone willing to pursue them with patience and discipline. And finally, there is the fourth question, perhaps the most important of them all. Why not now? There is never a perfect moment to begin redesigning your life. Waiting for perfect conditions only extends the period of drift. The best moment to start thinking differently is the moment you realize that your current direction no longer reflects the life you want to build. Change rarely begins with a dramatic event. It usually begins quietly with a decision to adopt a stronger philosophy and allow that philosophy to guide your actions from this point forward. So as you leave this conversation, remember that the future is not something that simply arrives. It is something that is gradually constructed through the choices you make every day. The past can teach you, but it does not have to define you. The present gives you the opportunity to act with intention, and the future will eventually reflect the philosophy you choose to live by. The question that remains is the same one Jim Rohn asked his audiences for decades. Why not you, and why not now?